Good morning, I'm Robert, the head mechanic here at Xtracycle, and I wanted to share with you some tips and tricks that myself and the dealers have figured out over the past year of assembling Edgerunners. These will come in handy as you build up your first bike or first 10 bikes. Before we get started on the build proper, I wanted to talk about how our accessory system works. It's unlike anything you've seen on any other bike, so I wanted to throw out a couple terms so that you will know what I'm talking about later in the video. First off is the horizontal ports. These ports are where horizontal accessories plug in, like the U-tubes, which are here, or the sidecar. The kickback also hangs off the horizontal ports. The vertical ports accept the V-racks, which are held in place by the rack locks. Of course, the V-racks serve the important purpose of holding onto the bags and supporting the flight deck, which is held on with super hooks. So that's sort of how everything sandwiches together and is secured to the frame of the bike. Now, on to the rest of the build. So now we're beginning the build proper. I've taken the bike out of the box, cut the steer tube, and installed the front fender and fork, as you can already see. For the steer tube, I cut about 40 millimeters off the top. The steer comes uncut and really is sized for somewhere around 6'5". If your customer is shorter than that, or you're just sizing it for a bike on the floor, I find cutting 40 millimeters off gives you the perfect length to have two spacers in there. The front fender is a pretty standard aluminum front fender. Nothing fancy, mid-blade mount, all that good stuff. One report we've had is that people are getting their mud flap rubbing against the tire or catching up underneath, and it's a simple fix. Just move the mud flap to the outside of the fender. It looks less clean, but it will save you a whole bunch of trouble. Finally, this is a 27 Deluxe, which means that it has a dynamo front hub. I've left the headlight off, but there's one thing I want to point out on this hub. The little connector should be angled down towards the ground and facing back towards the end of the bike at about a 45-degree angle. This prevents water from collecting in the connector, and if you leave a drip loop in the wire going to it, no water will accumulate from the wire as well. Hope that helps. One of the most novel parts about the Edgerunner is this removable tailpiece. It not only makes it easier for us to manufacture the bike, but it greatly reduces the amount of damage they sustain in shipping. It does come off the bike, however, so you'll have to find it in the parts kit and install it. It's really easy to get on there. Pops in, and then you install 4 bolts, 2 on either side, and align it using the V-racks that came with the Edgerunner. These slip directly into the vertical ports, like so. Now we're going to cut away. I'm going to bolt everything together, and you'll see how it looks when I'm done. All right, so installing the tailpiece. Pops right in. Need your bolts. So I'm using just V-racks to do the alignment because that's what comes in the box. But you can also use U-tubes or a wide loader to do the horizontal alignment. So you can put both the vertical and the horizontal racks in. And then it gets extra aligned. All right, so tightening 4 bolts gets really repetitive really quick. To get them close, don't tighten them all the way down. There's enough force on the drill that it'll suck the tailpiece out of alignment. Like that. So for the final torque, just use your trusty 3-way Allen. torque it down like you would a rotor. All right, so here it is all bolted together. If you've done it correctly, you should be able to still remove and insert the V-racks without too much trouble. So it looks like it's working fine. One thing that's worth noting that I didn't mention before is that there are little O-rings inside the rack locks. Pull those out before you do this process, and it makes it much easier to slide the racks in and out. All right, so that's the bike. Now it's time to start installing accessories. This is the X1 bag. It comes on pretty much all of our bikes, so being able to install it quickly will really help you out. The bag has a couple different types of loops. It has loops attached to the bag, like these ones, and then loops that are attached to the straps, like those ones. The strap loops are Velcro, the other ones are webbing. This bag has two parts. One's the front flap, which is held on by these three buckles and Velcro. And then the back part of the bag, which has some pockets in there, but most importantly, these webbing loops. And that's what actually secures the bag to the bike. One way to install this bag is to undo these webbing loops and then kind of lace the bag onto the rack, but that takes a little while, and I find it's much easier just to lace the bag onto the rack. So line everything back up again. And it's important to remember that there is a front side and a back side to the rack. The pointy bit is for the front. Same goes for the bags. The sharp corner goes on the front, blunt corner goes on the rear. And there's also a tag in here to remind you that this is a left side bag. All right, so to get it on there, simply take your rack, start with the front of the rack at the rear of the bag, and then thread it through all the loops, so the Velcros and the webbing loops. All right, and it's going to get a little bunched up on there. That's fine. All right. And then one last loop. All right, so now your bag's on there. Kind of squinch it around. And then pull it out, and there you go. It's an X1 bag on a V-rack, ready to be installed onto the bike. Check it out. Now it looks like a bag on a rack. And now you can just install it directly back into those vertical ports. And now that's a cargo bike. All right, now we have to get the O-ring back inside the rack lock. It just sits inside that little lip there, but we can't just lay it in on top. When you do that and reinsert the rack, it pushes the O-ring down into the bottom and bad times ensue. So take your rack, remove your rack lock, slide the rack lock onto the rack, then slide the O-ring on after it. And be sure to slide it past the point where the rack's going to insert into the frame. Then insert the rack into the bike, roll the O-ring down most of the way, and then slide the rack lock down on top of it. You'll know the rack lock is seated when the little lip underneath it disappears. Like so. Now, tying it down, and you're all set. Okay, now you have the bags on the racks back into the bike. All you have to do now to secure the bags is use those little straps in the back to tie everything down. This one's already in the correct position. Third loop from the top. I'm going to make one modification here, which is to pull this loop open. Remove the D-ring. Then pull the strap back, down, around, and thread it through and pull it tight. So here we are fastening the X1 bag. Pull back the bag, use the D-ring, secure it, and then pull it tight. The rear fender of the Edgerunner is somewhat unique. It has a wishbone rear stay that connects to the seat stay instead of the chain stay, making it much shorter than normal, and a elongated eyelet in the front stay. And that lets you adjust the positioning of that fender after you've mounted it. And that way you can edge it out of the way to clear the chain or edge it back to give a little bit more coverage. On the larges, it also comes with this 5mm spacer, both here and underneath the seat stay bridge. And that just moves the fender into the correct position. It's not needed on the mediums, and it's always included with the fender sets. So if you're installing fenders aftermarket, if it's a large, put them in. If it's not, you can leave that washer out. And that's the rear fender. So here we are installing the flight deck. It's really simple. The super hooks are bolted through the deck, hold the deck to the rail. So you can just put it on. Make sure the hooks are rotated into place. The deck is centered up on the straps, more or less, and then tying it all down. I recommend starting at the back because it makes tightening the front much easier to do. The racks spread a little bit as I go towards the front. So you can tighten all of them down, but one front one. You can see this doesn't line up super well there. You can get underneath it, push on it a little bit, make sure there's no strap pinched under there, and then tighten it down. These bolts are actually a little bit longer than they need to be. So if you're installing a bunch of flight decks or you just want to reduce your risk of carpal tunnel, I recommend using a drill with a clutch on it with a 4mm bit chucked into it so you can zap these in and not over torque them. But other than that, there's the flight deck. So for 2014, all of our frames are BionX compatible. We have a BionX adapter that we use to offset any standard BionX down tube battery so that you can mount it on the boom tube of the Edgerunner here. There's 2 points, just like your water bottle bosses would be on your down tube, that accept our adapter, and it lets you bolt it straight on there. So that's the BionX adapter. Thank you guys for bearing with us and watching me ramble on about all the intricacies of this bike. I hope you learned something, and I hope it was fun.